The name of this song is Hearing His Voice. So many voices in this world trying to get us to listen to them. So many voices in this world bringing all kinds of distraction. So many voices in this world trying to get us to listen unto them. Buy this one's better, no, go that way. Dr. So-and-so does say, but I'm here to tell you, friend, there is a better way. Stop and hear His voice. Hearing the voice of the living God will do more than all the experts of men. Hearing the voice of the living God as He's calling you out of sin. Hearing the voice of the living God as He's calling you to walk higher. Hearing the voice of the living God as He's snatching your feet from the very fire. Hearing the voice of the living God, hearing His voice. Hearing the voice of the living God as He snatches you into His arms. Hearing the voice of the living God as He calls your name. Hearing the voice of the living God as we lay aside our sin and shame. Hearing the voice of the living God as He stretched forth His hands to die. Hearing the voice of the living God as the crowd was shouting, crucify. Hearing His voice every day, keeping you in that eternal way. Hearing His voice, making your choice, living for the King of eternity. Hearing His voice, reading His word, it's the only way to make sure you heard. Hearing His voice, responding to Him, that's the way to keep you, my friend. Hearing His voice as He calls your name. Hearing His voice as you lay aside your shame. Hearing His voice as you take upon you the cross of Calvary. Hearing His voice as you take upon you your cross and come and die where first your Lord was crucified. Hearing His voice as He calls to a backslidden nation. Hearing His voice as we depart from sin that incurs His indignation. Hearing His voice is so important to do. Hearing His voice as He calls to me and even unto you. Hearing His voice. So many voices calling our name. Hearing His voice. Choosing eternal fame. his voice, despising the shame. Hearing his voice, you've made your choice. Hearing his voice, you made your choice to follow the Lamb. Hearing his voice, you made your choice for the great I am. Hearing his voice as he calls out your name. Well done, my good and faithful servant. Enter in. Hearing his voice as he calls out your name. Hearing his voice, we've made our choice for him. Hearing his voice as he calls out your name. Hearing his voice, laying aside sin and shame.